name's Joyce Treasure. I'm a multidisciplinary artist and I'm based here in Birmingham, UK. Multidisciplinary means that you can work in multiple ways, basically. So I use film, I use assemblage, I use performance, I use collage, and I use paints, I use drawing. Most recently, I guess my most common practice in the latter part of my practice has been using performing arts. So my work it's around identity, predominantly Black identity. It's looking at colonialism and the notions of power, hierarchy, and I like to subvert that idea. I like to kind of turn it on its head. So it depends what I'm doing for what it is that I'm responding to. So at the moment I'm working on an album cover, and I don't know if I can say what it is because it's not released, but I'm working on an album cover, and and I've chosen collage because I want to do a rendition of some work by Hannah Hawk, and she's a collage artist, and it just ties in with what it is that I'm responding to. That I'm responding to work that is around slave dance, and so this particular commission loans itself to that. Well, they approached me and explained the parallel state and how it's set up as a platform to explore alternative ways of seeing the world. And they'd already done work that I could go and listen to. So they've got a platform on SoundCloud. I went and listened to what kind of stuff they'd done in the past, and they'd done a piece in Sheffield, and they were talking around. They invited a group of feminists, black feminists, to respond to this idea of solidarity and what solidarity meant, and kind of critique it. And so the way that they did that, it was so informative. I was able to take that back to another project that I was working on. I thought, yeah, I want to be involved with these people. They're doing some good stuff. And so they invited myself, another artist called Sam Menz, and another young artist called Lavs to respond to Breakaway State. And they were going to do a Zoom meeting. Well, they did do a Zoom meeting based in Bristol, and they had a group of people speaking, and then they had our art project that was responding to this topic of Breakaway State, which was around the notion of a felt structure and to think of an alternative state of being. So yeah, I decided to call that short film, or the project that I worked on last, Breakaway State, just in reflection to what they were calling it. I thought I'll keep it the same. And that's what it's doing. It's kind of thinking of alternative ways of being. At the time, I was writing my dissertation for my university degree. I was doing Black Studies at BCU, and in that dissertation, I was looking at colonialism. I was looking at trauma and links between colonialism, trauma, social, personal, and I was using a bricolage of work. And in that work, I started to do performance, and I was writing my dissertation. It was quite intense. We were in lockdown. It was the first lockdown, and Breonna Taylor was being played out. So it's pandemic. Breonna Taylor was being played out onto our screens, George Floyd and Elijah McClain. And I was finding it progressively more and more difficult. I was finding, to try and write and try and finish your work whilst all this is happening in the background, and you've got pandemic there, and you're not sure about what's happening. That was happening before the commission came. So before that time, I had got a costume that I was working with that I would wear to perform in. And so I set up the camera and I started to perform in my costume and started to do movements, because I know how I operate. I know what I need to do in order to rid myself of the toxicity that can happen when you're seeing this stuff being played out on your screen and on your phone and everywhere you're looking. And so I set up the camera, started performing, and just rolled the camera and just put it to bed. Took the costume off, felt much better, exercised that kind of embodiment of whiteness, and then put that to rest. And then the commission came in, and I looked at what they were proposing to do, and I thought, right, I'm going to use the footage that I've already shot. It fits in with what they're talking about, what they're doing, what they proposed to do. It was a talk that was going to be happening in Bristol. I'd also, some of the movements in the work was responding to the toppling of Edward Colston, and so there was a lot contained in that movement. And so I knew that the first phase of the Breakaway State was going to be that. I was going to come back to it and start editing it into the format that it was edited into. And then the second phase is kind of a place in which you're in meditation, in calm. And so it's kind of, and then the third phase is the space of resistance and also hope and looking at a world. And I decided to write it as though you were looking back in time. So it's the future looking back and talking about this time, this period of time, this is what happens, and it's all very hopeful. Beth Coleman, she talks about, she calls the trapdoor a space of escape, a kind of a location to get out. And I'm going to refer to my writing because it's quite an academic piece of theory, and so it's hard to just draw it off my mind. But so Beth Coleman calls the trapdoor as a way out, a third space, and she talks about this in her essay called Race as Technology, and she recognises that race is not a trait but a tool, and she talks about who organises the patterns concerning race. And then she talks about the trapdoor as a way out or a third space. In her essay, Race as Technology, Coleman moves race away from the biological and genetic historical systems towards questions of technological agency. And Kabina Mercer, in his address, Framing the Moment, Legacies of the 1982 Black Movement Group Conference, speaks of this third space as a starting point and what it takes to self-start. And so it's kind of like thinking about, I think of jazz and blues and those creative movements which are self-starting spaces. The Black Art movement did a cut and paste and talked about it as problem-solving activities. Those that felt neglected by the archaic dullness of institutional inertia during the 1970s art world in Britain were orphans of the storm. This is how Kabina Mercer describes the Black Art movement. They were orphans of the storm. Mercer draws a comparison to James Baldwin, who refers to blacks as the peculiar stepchildren of the West. This is quotations, right? Mercer situated orphans as self-reliant characters, giving them an initiative as to self-starters that are able to seek out radical options, and what Coleman calls the trapdoor as a paradigm shift. And it's kind of like it's good to think of it as music, this repetitive, repeated motion of music that exists. Indra Viscontis talks about this regularity in beats, and that a good musician will use those regularity of beats and then change the beat into something interesting to keep the person or to keep the listener entertained and listening. And if we're doing the same things over and over again, then it just becomes, it's not there's nothing new in that. And the trapdoor is that escape route into something new, which happens a lot in art, and a lot in music, I guess. In that second phase, I started to use footage that I shot when I went traveling in 2017. I was in Gambia, and I went to Contakinti Island, formerly known as St. James Island. And that was a location, it's now a ruin, but it used to be where enslaved Africans were kept in, they were kept in cells before they went off to Americas. And that island is still a place where you can go and visit. And so when I was on that island, it's unfortunately it's getting smaller and smaller because of sea levels. But when I was on the island, I kind of connected with that. I use my body a lot. I feel my body as I move in different locations. I can feel how I respond to space. And I started filming the water there as it was just washing up onto the island. And I used that in that second phase. And I also started filming the canals. One of the canals in Birmingham, when I went out on a cycle. I wasn't jogging, I was on a cycle. And so the location, that the idea in my head is that water as memory, it contains memory. And if the water could speak to us, what would it tell us? What would it say? And I mean, this is a very magical space in which to think this, there's no answers to that. But they sit side by side, and it's talking about these different locations. But what are the waters saying? What are they recalling? What are they holding in there? What are they holding in there? What have they got to say? And when it comes into that second phase as well, I start to use something called binary beats. And binary beats are set at two different frequencies. And what the brain does, it listens to the two different frequencies and creates a third one of its own that doesn't actually exist, but it uses these two frequencies to create this third. And that's kind of what this third element is to me. It's creating something out of something that exists into something new. And what would be interesting to do with those two bodies of waters in an art project, which doesn't exist, but let's talk about what could exist, is to put them under some kind of observation, some microscopic observation, and to look at what's contained in there on a microscopic level, and to do a compare and contrast of those two different waters. That would be interesting. And maybe to do something around prayer and meditation around those waters, and to measure them in one level as you find them, and then after prayer and meditation, what do they look like afterwards? Do they change? Do those bodies of waters, do they have a memory? Do they contain something different? Yeah, I just think it would be a good experiment to do. I bought the white dress when I went to see a show called I Came Here to Dance. We went into the charity shop and I saw the dress on the rail. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh my days. They were looking somewhere else. So I was thinking, it's a missionary dress. This is a missionary dress. So I got it out, went into the changing room, put it on. And as soon as I put it on, I changed into this character. I came out of the dressing room and I was like, I just turned into it. I just possessed this new character that I performed in straight away without even thinking about it. And then I took the dress off, went and saw the show, end of that. And each time I put the dress on, I do transform into this character that I've decided to call Ms. Missionary. And it points to colonialism as an obvious, well, not as an obvious one, but it does point to colonialism. But it also points to, who is the missionary, and where is this process of care going? Who's giving the care and who's receiving the care, and how does that care look? And there's colonialism missionary, and I've got a quote here that I'd like to kind of just refer to. It was Desmond Tutu made the quote famous by saying, when the missionaries came to Africa, they had the Bible and we had the land. They said, let us pray. We closed our eyes, and when we opened them, we had the Bible and they had the land. I mean, we know that phrase, right? Everyone knows that phrase, but it's just an interesting process as well. When someone comes to help you, are they coming to help you, or are they coming to help you? What kind of help is coming forth? And it's that shift again between, for me, there's always this shift between my work, which is what's social and what's personal. And especially in this lockdown period, there's been a real time for reflection and self-reflection. So that missionary mode, that missionary is about how do we reflect and care for ourselves. And so there's the self-care and also this other place over here, the colonial place over here. That's always, for me, that's all I'm always, not always relating to, but it's in the work, especially in that costume's relating to that kind of back and forth. When I filmed it, it was very loose, it was just me moving in the dress. But when I came to editing it, so there's, on one level there's a lot of freedom in it, but on another level there's a lot of control, because I'm editing it down into what I want to see moving and happening, and responding to the music that I use. So that particular piece of music was a very the album Symbolism. The album's called Symbolism. It helped me through that period in terms of, it was very uplifting, because music can do that, right? It has that capacity. And so the movements in the dress, there's sadness in there, there's anger, there's rage, there's joy, there's a turning away, there's like a refusal. I'm done with this. There's the throwing away, there's the getting rid of, there's the purging, and there's the turning my back on all of that. Or, turning my back on certain things, like I don't even have to have this conversation anymore. There's this kind of, all these different feelings and emotions. And then after that comes into the peace, the calm. We need to get it out. We can't be having these emotions tied in. An exorcism, maybe you could say, and a knowing where to move forward with my art practice, because I really like this idea of using costume as a performance piece. There's an artist, Michelle Gamaka. She talks about fictional activism and using fiction. And what I forgot to mention about the dress is that it reminds me of a film that I've been looking closely at called Daughters of Dust, and that's around the Gullah people, and the community within that film. And it's a non-linear film as well. It's beautiful. It's really poetic, and I identify with Yellow Mary in that film. And so I kind of think about her as a character. Not that I'm a prostitute, but I do like. She plays the role of a prostitute, even though you don't really see it. You don't see it like that. And but I identify with non-conformity. I'm not a conformist, and so that character is there, and I like the idea of putting on a costume and being able to talk and speak about things that you need to articulate. So there's a movement called decorative dissidence, and that's around using traditional crafts and having a voice of dissidence, either through wearing the costume or maybe, well, that's how I understand it anyway. And so what's in doing the work that I've done in this body of work, it's kind of informed me of where I want to move forward, and I kind of want to carry on with that. It's exciting. I like the idea because it helps you to, for me, it helps you to be able to articulate feelings that maybe would be too difficult to articulate otherwise. Yeah, definitely, definitely. I've just discovered a therapy around movement called, you probably know about it actually, Sandra, authentic movement. And normally when you do that, you move in response to what you might be feeling, and the therapist observes you and then feeds back to you and I guess I became my own therapist in that space because there was no one around. I was in isolation. There was no one around to observe me except for myself. And I guess in the editing stage I became that therapist feeding back. So I was able to kind of look at myself and think, what was happening there. So yeah, it was definitely a cathartic experience. Um, yeah, I'd say so. I'd say so. Yeah. My practice has always been. It's always been responding to trauma or historical trauma and colonialism anyway. It's not like a new thing. It's not like it's a new experience. My work, as any artist will say, it will inform the next body of work. So it's always that kind of, each iteration informs the next, and so it's always in that you're always going back and forth and looking at what that work, how that work will move you forward into the next one. I guess it depends what commissions come in as well. So this commission that I'm working on at the moment, it is relatable because it's around slave dance, um, and so it's I guess um, I guess in terms of looking at trauma and how the work can help, it's just a matter of I can't think of a precise answer actually to conclude. There's no conclusion. There's not a conclusion to it really, because depending what the commission is and how I respond to it will depend how I will then engage with it. But I guess I've kind of covered it in terms of saying that I use it as like the performance as like a decorative dissidence. So I've applied for a development fund, and that's to look at decorative dissidence as a body of and to produce a body of work in response to that. So I couldn't have come to that application of funding having not done what I've done with the parallel state, with the breakaway state rather, and what I did in my dissertation. It's all kind of natural progress. So Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart Jordan tells us that trauma is an accumulative emotional and psychological wound that transmits across generations. And so the work's interested in how you know, how do we respond to that as rest as a form of resistance? You know, because my work is always interested in, at the end of the day, really in well-being and mental health and mental wealth. And so how do we use that as a form of, so we heal, but at the same time we resist. And, you know, it's striking that balance really. And another Zen Buddhist master, Thich Nhat Hanh, talks about how when we heal, we not only heal for ourselves, but we heal for our ancestors and we heal for our future generation. So that's always an interesting place to think about when you're doing your work. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about my work, because it's one thing doing it, but it's another thing talking about it. It's really important. As much as, you know, sometimes you dread it, it is important to think about what it is that you've done. And I really want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity and allowing me the time.